Hey, what's up, nerds? It's Paul here at Radio Free Hammer Hall, and today I am bringing you my review of the new Maggotkin of Nurgle Battle Tome. I am very excited for this, and a shout out to, say, Facehammer, AOS Coach, Goonhammer, uh, and a whole bunch of other people that put together reviews of this and did such a great job and such a detailed review between all of them that even though I did not get an advanced copy of this book from Games Workshop, I basically got it all from their videos and was able to piece everything together to do my own review. So it took a bit of work, but here we are, and we're going to take a dive into this new book. So my overall initial impressions. Everything in this book is really durable. Um, Everything got much less mobile, and we have a lot of abilities that do mortal wounds in some way. Lots of little chip damage here and there. A lot of scrolls got boosted power, but a lot of them also got significant points increases. So where I'm sitting right now is the jury is kind of still out on how good this book actually is, and I think most of it lies in the points values for units. I think the scrolls are fine, and the abilities are fine. It's just going to depend on, things like the disease mechanic, seeing how much damage that actually does in practice versus the sort of theory hammer of it, and feeling all of that out. It's going to take some reps of gameplay, I think, to actually get a good feel for this book, rather than just being able to theory hammer the whole thing and kind of know what it's going to do without experiencing it. So let's get down to it. Our allegiance abilities. Our coalition remains unchanged. We can still take 1 in 4 units as Skaven Pestilens. 1 in 4 are Beasts of Chaos, and they gain the Nurgle keyword. And 2 in 4 can be Slaves to Darkness with the Nurgle mark. I'm not sure about allies. I haven't actually seen that particular little snippet of the book. Um, Presumably, they're not really going to be different than they were before, though. Um, Other allegiance abilities we have. Disgustingly resilient. All of the units in this book have a 5-up ward save. That is huge. This whole book got extremely durable. And even the things that already had disgusting resilience got more durable in other ways. In addition, all Maggotkin units heal 1 wound in each of your hero phases. And then we have the Locus of Fecundity. So that comes off of our Great Unclean ones, Horticulus Slimux, the Glotkin, and Festus the Leech Lord. And the Disgusting Resilience healing within 14 inches of those models heals D3 instead of 1. So very strong healing there. I like it a lot. And then our last allegiance ability we have here is Diseased. So at the end of the movement phase and the combat phase, each enemy gets a disease token if they're within 3 inches of a Maggotkin unit. All of your 6s to hit with your Maggotkin units add disease tokens to enemy units that they're attacking. Then at the beginning of each battle shock phase, you roll a die for each disease token on a unit. Every 4-up does a mortal wound. And at the end of the battle shock phase, you reduce disease tokens to 1 on all units. Any abilities that can heal wounds, you can also use to remove disease tokens. Also, important note here, these are not the only ways to get disease tokens. There's a lot of ways to accumulate disease in this book. So bear in mind, whenever you see something is getting disease, that means at the end of the turn, on a 4-up, it's getting an extra mortal wound. So a lot of extra damage coming off of this. So our sub-factions. So these got streamlined compared to what the previous ones were that we had in Wrath of the Everchosen. They're a lot less heavy-handed. They're just really one ability that applies to your army. We have 6 of them, so we had the 4 that we had before, and we added 2 new ones. So let's just run through those real quick. Munificent Wanderers. So enemy units within 3 inches of a Plague Bearer host unit with 10 or more models gets 2 disease counters instead of 1 in each movement and combat phase. So that's not terrible, but it certainly is a little bit tough. As we'll see later on, I think Plague Bearers are not really going to be a strong, like, offensive piece. So I really struggled with what you do with Munificent Wanderers. I don't think it's really one that's going to be that strong to take. Befouling Host, if your general is a demon, you can start the game with a second Feculent Gnarlmaw, and this also makes Beasts of Nurgle battle line. Beasts of Nurgle as battle line is interesting. I'm not sure how I feel about that entirely yet. I've got to feel out how good Beasts of Nurgle actually are. Also, this would let you take Beasts of Nurgle in packs of 3. Rather than just 2, which is also interesting. The extra Feculent Gnarlmaw, I think, is really not that useful. It's only going to give you an extra 5 contagion, maybe, over the course of the game. Droning Guard. All of your Plague Drones are -1 to hit in the first battle round, and in the first battle round after they are set up. So if they deep strike somehow, the first battle round that they are in play, they are -1 to be hit. This also makes Plague Drones battle line. I'm not sure how I feel about this one. Again, Plague Drones, as we'll see, are not really that exciting in this book, so I see a limited use for Droning Guard. Alright, now we have the mortal-focused ones. We have Blessed Sons. When a mortal is slain, roll a die for each wound that the model had. So if a Blight King goes down, there are 4 wounds, so you roll 4 dice. Each 6 you roll adds 1 disease to the enemy unit. Drowned Men. Lord of Afflictions and Puscoil Blight Lords can make an 8-inch pregame move. I think that's really strong. This is probably one of the better options that we have available, and this also makes Puscoil Blight Lords battle line. And then finally we have the Filthbringers. You can use the Rot Covens unit, which is a group of 3 sorcerers. They each always have +1 to cast. They'll have +2 to cast when they're within 3 inches of one other sorcerer model, and +3 to cast when they're within 3 inches of 2 other sorcerer models. So this is really interesting. We have limited ways to buff casting, and I think part of the problem here may be that our casting isn't that great. Like, our spells aren't that great, as we're going to see. Like, they're fine, but they're not earth-shaking. So I think the primary use of this would probably be for pushing out endless spells, which also get a boost from Rotbringer sorcerers. It's interesting. This one might have some play. I'm not really sure. This is definitely something you have to build around. All right, so we get the Cycle of Corruption back, and we have all 7 spots on the wheel now are different than they were before. On spot 1, your Maggotkin heroes have a 4-up ward save instead of a 5-up. Number 2, all units are treated as being within a locus of fecundity, so they're always healing D3 in your hero phase instead of 1. You roll a die equal to the battle round. For each 4-up, you gain a command point. This is interesting. So if you're in battle round 3, you roll 3 dice, and every 4-up is a command point. That's interesting. It's useful. I think this isn't going to be a book that's really starved for command points. I'm not sure like how much you're actually going to be using them for, so I don't know how useful that really is, but it's certainly a thought. It's there. Um, Number 4, non-Nurgle heroes cannot carry out heroic actions or issue rally or inspiring presence commands. Oh man, is that good. I like that quite a bit. All right, then number 5, enemy units without the Nurgle keyword are -1 to charge and cannot pile in closer to Nurgle units. Again, wow, is that good. That's really, really strong. Number 6, +1 to disease rolls. So, normally disease does a mortal wound on a 4-up. This would put it on a 3-up. That is, again, that's really strong. And then number 7, at the start of your hero phase, gain a contagion point for each feculent Gnarlmaw on the battlefield. I'm going to be honest, that one kind of sucks. That's not really that good. But overall, I think there's nothing in here that is just straight up not doing anything. Like on the last cycle of Contagion, we had one of them, I think it was number 4, was enemies reroll battle shock tests of 1. Like, that doesn't do anything. So we all have something here that is at least doing something each battle round. Some are better than others. I think on the bottom is probably getting a contagion point for each feculent Gnarlmaw. As we will see, you probably only want 1 feculent Gnarlmaw. So 1 extra contagion point for summoning is not that exciting. But adding 1 to disease rolls, I believe there's other abilities to add to disease rolls. Enemies not being able to pile in. Non-Nurgle heroes not being able to use heroic actions, getting extra command points, healing extra, getting a better ward save on your heroes. All of those things are really good. I definitely like this a lot. There's only one spot on the wheel that really kind of falls flat a little bit for me, and I think everything else is really useful. All right, so our summoning. The mechanic is really similar to what we had in the last book. And our summoning table is quite a bit different, but let's go through it. So gaining contagion, you get 3 points for having units in your territory, 3 points for having units in enemy territory. You get 1 point for each player's territory where you have troops and are unopposed by enemy units. And then you get 1 for each feculent Gnarlmaw. So the big change here is that feculent Gnarlmaws used to give you D3, and now they're just giving you 1. So I don't think we're really going to be putting more than just the 1 starting feculent Gnarlmaw on the battlefield. The feculent Gnarlmaw also had a significant change to its war scroll. I think I left that slide out of this, so I'll just go over it right now. It doesn't have the run and charge locus around it anymore. So the only thing that it really does is generate contagion points and act as a locus for summoning. It really has become pretty useless. It's just kind of a thing you're going to throw in the corner and accumulate contagion points for you. As we see here, units that you summon can be set up wholly within 7 inches of a Maggotkin hero or a feculent Gnarlmaw. That's also changed a little bit. It used to be within 12 inches of a Maggotkin hero or a feculent Gnarlmaw, so it's definitely more restrictive than it was before. And of course, it also has to be greater than 9 inches away from enemy units. Our summoning table, 30 contagion will get you a great unclean one. 18 contagion gets you 3 plague drones. On the old chart, that was 21. 14 gets you 10 plague bearers. That is the same value as the old table. 12 gets you a poxbringer. He is down 2 contagion points from the old book. 10 gets you 1 Beast of Nurgle, that's down 4 points from the old book. Feculent Gnarlmaws are going to cost you 9, that's up 7 from the old book, so those are actually more expensive than they used to be, and I really can't justify why in the world you would do that. Like, I can't see a place where you're ever summoning a Feculent Gnarlmaw. Like, the most points it can ever be worth is 4 contagion points in one game. And even there, you're not going to accumulate 9 contagion on your first battle round, so it's really only ever going to accumulate 3 contagion for you. So you're really at like -6 contagion when you summon a Feculent Gnarlmaw, and it really has no utility other than getting those contagion points for you and being a locus for summoning. Alright, next up, we have a unit of 3 Nurglings. That is 8 contagion points. That used to be 14 contagion points, so that is significantly better than it used to be. That may actually be one of the best things on this table to actually summon, is a unit of 3 Nurglings. We're going to talk more about Nurglings later on, but I think they might actually have some play in this book, and at a summoning value of 8 contagion points, I think that may be a solid thing to summon on a regular basis. Sloppity Bilepiper and Spoilpox Scrivener are both now clocking in at 7 contagion points each, and that is half of what they used to be. I'm not sure about how often you're actually going to use this. They are much narrower in their use than they used to be, and Sloppity Bilepiper got a couple of changes to his warscroll as well. So while it's nice to be able to summon those for cheap, I really wonder how often you're going to be using them. Alright, so moving on to command traits. As before, we have ones for mortals and ones for demons. First up is our mortals. We got Grandfather's Blessing. This was also exactly the same in the old book. So once per game, you can move the cycle of corruption forward or back 1 space in your hero phase. The catch here is that this also used to be able to go on demons, but now it can only go on your mortals. This is probably one of the best command traits that we have available to us. It was definitely the best command trait in the old book. I think it has a couple of other contenders here that are also pretty solid, but it's definitely one of your strongest choices, especially because this is now the only way to manipulate the cycle of corruption, and we're going to talk more about that later, but this is the only way to manipulate the cycle of corruption at all. Move it forward or back 1 space once a game. Infernal Conduit. In your hero phase, you roll a die. On a 2 through 5, you gain 1 contagion, and on a 6, you gain D3 contagion. Living Plague. In your hero phase, you roll a die for each enemy unit within 7 inches. On a 2-up, they get 1 disease token. Avalanche of Rotten Flesh. After the hero makes a charge roll, you roll dice equal to the charge roll. So if you roll a 7 on your charge, you roll 7 dice. Each 6 does a mortal wound and 1 disease token. Bloated with Corruption, ward rolls of 6 inflict 1 disease on the attacker. That one in particular, there's also other abilities that do the same thing, or they trigger on a 6 to wound. I'm sorry, a ward of 6, not to wound. And so you got to be careful of who you're putting that on, so you're not doubling up that ability and kind of canceling one of them out. And then our last one, this is our other strong contender for the mortal abilities. Overwhelming Stench. Enemies within 7 inches cannot issue or receive commands. That is real good. I think it's going to be a hard contest between this and Grandfather's Blessing. given the usefulness of things on the cycle of corruption, I think Overwhelming Stench might actually be better than Grandfather's Blessing. Just getting in your opponent's face and denying them use of their command abilities is really strong, especially in this edition. You're just going to make your opponent leave command points on the table, which is really strong for you. All right, our demon command traits. Gift of Verbal Frenzy. Uh, Once per battle, all Maggotkin units within 7 inches get +1 attack to each of their melee profiles. Limited use. I'm not sure how strong that actually is. There's not a lot of ways to get extra attacks in this book anymore. So I'm really not sure how that is. It might be good. I'm not sure. Nurgling Infestation. -1 to hit rolls that target the general, and units of Nurglings within 7 inches of the general are +1 to hit. Not sure why we're buffing Nurglings, but okay. Pestilent Breath. In your shooting phase, you pick an enemy unit within 7 inches. Roll a die for each model within 7 inches from that unit, and each 5-up deals a mortal wound to that unit. So a little bit of a horde thinning spell, although right now hordes are really not an issue, so that could get better with future books, but right now not that good. All right, moving on to artifacts, and boy howdy do we have a lot of these. The Eye of Nurgle. Once per battle in your hero phase, if there are enemy units within 14 inches with a disease counter on them, roll 2d6. On a 7, the nearest enemy model is slain. So the upshot of this is you can just one-hit kill Archaon, but it's only a 1 in 6 chance of doing it. Odds of a 7 on 2d6 are 1 in 6. And the unit you're targeting has to be the nearest enemy model to your general, and it has to have a disease counter on it already. So this is really hard to get to go off, because you can also only attempt this once per battle. So I think this one goes in the fun but not good bin. It'll be really cool to spike Nagash with just a 1 hit, but I just don't see myself ever taking this. The Fetid Shroud. In the combat phase, pick a hero that is not an enemy monster, subtract 1 from hit rolls by that hero, and add 1 to hit rolls targeting that hero. I'm not sure how I feel about this one either. It might have some decent use against like Sons of Bahamut and other. Well, actually, I'm sorry. No, it doesn't, because it has to be an enemy hero that is not a monster. So, yeah, this is mostly just going to target like little foot heroes. It's not good. Shield of Growths. The bearer can reroll saves if the roll is equal to or less than the number of wounds allocated to it. So this kind of needs to go on something with a decent wound value, and as the unit gets damaged more, it's going to be able to roll more of its saves. So it's kind of weird. The mortal with the most wounds on him is going to be your Lord of Afflictions at 8 wounds. So it's awkward. I don't know how much use this is really going to get. The Flesh Peeler. In your hero phase, you roll a die for each enemy unit within 7 inches. On 4-up, they get a disease token. So just another way to add a little bit more disease if you're getting your heroes up in your opponent's face. All right, more mortal artifacts. The Splithorn Helm. The bearer gets a 4-up ward save instead of the normal 5-up we get from Disgusting Resilience. I think that's actually really good. If you throw that on Lord of Afflictions, he has a comparable defensive profile to Gotrek. So he's going to be really hard to take down. So I think that one is probably one I'm going to be using quite a bit. The Feckin' Flask, once per game in your hero phase, roll a die. On a 2-up, heal all wounds allocated to the bearer. If you roll a 1, the bearer is slain and he becomes a Beast of Nurgle. Again, I'm not sure how much play that's going to get, because your best target for that is a Lord of Afflictions and only 8 wounds. So the max you can heal with that is 6, 7? Not a lot. The Mutter Grub, the hero becomes a wizard and knows Gift of Disease. If they're already a wizard, they get +1 to cast Gift of Disease. And we'll see Gift of Disease in a couple of minutes here. And then the Rustfang, this just makes me sad. Once per battle, an enemy hero within 3 inches is -1 to save for the rest of the game. So we went from every combat phase handing out -1 to save for the rest of the game to once per battle and restricted to heroes. Not a fan. Can't say that I am a fan of that one. I think out of the mortal artifacts, the Splithorn Helm is probably the one I'm going to be taking most often. And yeah, I don't know. The artifacts for mortals, I think, are a little thin, a little bit touchy. They would be better if our selection of mortal heroes was more suited to taking these artifacts, but it's really not, because our best mortal heroes are all unique, so they can't take artifacts. Alright, so our demon artifacts. The Bountiful Swarm, once per battle in your hero phase, pick an enemy model within 3 inches, roll a die. If the roll is higher than that model's wounds characteristic, it is slain. So this is another roll dice and one-shot kill a model. If the unit had a wounds characteristic of 4 or more, it becomes a Beast of Nurgle under your control. So kind of neat. It's going to be hard to really kill something of value with this. You know, typically you're going to want to point this at like a 5 wound hero, so you're only going to spike the hero on a 6. So like that other artifact, it's only going to work 1 in 6 times. I don't know. It's not that useful. Endless Gift, the bearer always heals D3 from Disgustingly Resilient rather than the normal 1. I think that's actually pretty good as well. Depending on who it goes on. Again, we have this problem where, you know, a Great Unclean one is already healing D3, so all of the heroes that aren't unique, that are going to be demons, are your 3 chump heralds that are just 5 wound guys. So healing D3 instead of 1 I think is not that useful. Those guys are just going to crumble to getting attacked. So you'll probably never actually get a chance at healing them. This would be better if the other abilities in this book were worse. Or if we had some more powerful heroes in the demon camp that were not unique. Noxious Nexus, the unit counts as 2 units instead of 1 for the diseased battle trait. So in the hero phase and in the combat phase, they're handing out 2 disease tokens instead of 1. Nurgle's Nail, you choose a melee weapon and it inflicts disease on a 5-up instead of a 6. So this one is actually interesting. The way it is currently worded, and it's probably going to get FAQ'd and changed, but the new Great Unclean One War Scroll, his host of Nurglings does 15 attacks. And as written right now, I believe you can use Nurgle's Nail on those Nurgling attacks and then do disease on 5-ups with them. So you'd average a third of the 15, so 5 disease tokens on every round of combat. That's pretty good. I'm not gonna lie, that's pretty good. Tome of 1,000 Poxes. This is the same as the Mutter Grub, except for demons. So, becomes a wizard, knows Gift of Contagion. If it's already a wizard, it gains +1 to cast Gift of Disease. The Wither Stave. Enemy units within 7 inches add 1 to disease rolls. That is interesting. I'm going to have to see how powerful disease actually is in practice, and then see how much of the Wither Stave is actually going to be worth. It would definitely be interesting to throw that on a great unclean one and really get up in your opponent's face and pop off a lot of disease. So it's certainly interesting. All right, up next we have our spells for mortals. Magnificent Buboes casts on a 7. You pick an enemy unit within 21 inches, and it's -1 to hit. That is a pretty good spell. And keeping in mind that we have a couple of bonuses to cast in the mortals hanging around, that casting value 7 is a little bit less scary. Plague Squall, casting value of 5. You roll 7 dice. Each roll of a 6 does 1 disease to a unit on the battlefield. So this used to, be the same, casting value 5, roll 7 dice, and then each 6 used to inflict D3 mortal wounds. So this is a major downgrade. I don't think this spell is really worth taking at all. The old spell wasn't worth taking, and it did D3 mortal wounds instead of 1 disease on every 6. The Coiling Quagmire, casting value of 5. You choose an enemy unit within 14 inches and roll a die. If the roll is greater than the enemy unit's save characteristic, then have the movement characteristic of that unit, and it is -2 to run and charge until your next hero phase. So you have to hurdle over 2 different rolls here. You have to cast the spell, and then you have to roll over the enemy save characteristic. So this is actually going to be better on, your stupid Stormcast Annihilators with their 2-up save. But it's going to be bad against, Witch Elves, which is silly. I would have to go through all the scrolls in the game and see, what units have what saves and, how often, saves that are good enough to make this useful pop up. Right now it seems like it's fairly common to have good saves on things, so, a lot of times it's going to be like a 4-up. But those 3s and 2s would be very valuable. And all of this just to have the movement characteristic and reduce run and charge by 2 until your next hero phase. Not as good as some of the old spells that we had in the last book. Blades of Putrefaction, this one got a downgrade. A friendly Maggotkin unit within 14 inches will inflict disease on rolls of 5 or 6 instead of just 6. Definitely, not terrible, but not really that exciting either. It's going to double the amount of contagion that you do. I'm sorry, not contagion. Double the amount of disease that you do. So many of these things sound so similar. Gift of Disease, casting value of 6. It inflicts 1 disease token on an enemy unit within 21 inches, and then 1 disease to each other enemy unit within 7 inches of that unit. So you do a little disease bomb across the battlefield. pretty nice. I definitely like that one. All right, and then finally we have Rancid Visitations, casting value of 6. Pick an enemy unit within 7 inches and roll a die for each model in that unit within 7 inches of the caster. On a 2-up, that unit suffers a mortal wound. That's good. This is going to be on a wizard that you want to get up in combat, so this will probably go on Bloab or on your Glotkin. But you get them up into combat, and then you cast this on something nearby or in combat with you, and you just do a whole bunch of mortal wounds to that unit. Doing mortal wounds on a 2-up, when you're counting the number of models near you is really strong. So that, I think, is definitely a possibility. That gets way better in a metagame with a lot of horde units. So just sort of to recap this, I think Magnificent Buboes, I think, is probably one of the best spells we have available. It's nice, simple, straightforward, -1 to hit. Nothing too crazy there. Blades of Putrefaction isn't bad. I think that one is certainly something that's okay. Certainly maybe a second spell slot. And Rancid Visitations is one that's like, once in a while, this is going to be really interesting to run. If you want to, say, turn Bloab into, just a bomb. Definitely has some interesting possibilities. All right, and now our demon spells. Favored Poxes. This guy is, I think, just about identical to the old version of it. Casting value 5, you pick an enemy unit within 14 inches. That unit is -1 to hit, wound, and save, but only until the caster moves, attacks, or attempt to cast or unbind a spell, or is slain. So you get to cast this spell, and then you have to basically do nothing with the caster after that until you want the spell to go away, or you're okay with the spell going away. Also, we don't have any casting buffs for demons anymore, so this one is a little bit hard to cast at a casting value of 7. It's definitely strong, but with the new roles of certain units, I don't think you're really going to be using a Great Unclean one as a support piece too much anymore. So this is probably going to go on a Poxbringer. So I don't know how often you're actually going to bring a Poxbringer and have him sit in a safe place and deal out favored Poxes that on a 7 to cast is a little bit difficult. Fleshy Abundance. This used to be on the Glotkin's War Scroll, and now it is in the Demon Spell lore. So casting value of 7, it adds 1 to the wounds characteristic of a friendly unit until your next hero phase. That's real strong, especially when you throw it on like Plague Bearers, for example. Very strong on Plague Bearers. Stream of Corruption, casting value of 6. You pick an enemy unit within 7 inches and roll a die for each enemy model within 7 inches. Each roll of a 5-up inflicts a mortal wound. You can instead extend the range to 14 inches and only do mortal wounds on a 6 instead of a 5-up. This one, I think, actually has some play to it. This is probably a good one to slap on your Great Unclean one, because he's more likely to be the combat mode in this new book. Definitely a useful spell. I think out of all of these, I think Stream of Corruption is probably what I would take on a Great Unclean one, and then Favored Poxes and Fleshy Abundance are really more choices to go on like a Poxbringer that's going to be supporting your units. All right, so let's get into the War Scrolls. Up first, we've got Rotigus. So just quickly looking at his profile, His wounds characteristic has gone up to 20 from 16, so that is definitely a major buff. Still has a 4-up save. He has a 4-inch move now. I believe that used to be 5. For his attacks, his Gnarl Rod is 5 attacks, 3 up, 3 up, -1, 3 damage. And then his Fanged Maw is D3 attacks, 3 up, 2 up, -2, 2 damage. And then Host of Nurglings, 15 attacks on 5s and 5s, no rend, 1 damage. So that is an interesting profile. The wound roll for the Fanged Maw and the attack number for the Host of Nurglings is on the wound chart. But that, it's gonna, you have to put 7 wounds on him before he brackets at all. So definitely really good. So his War Master ability, he is always counting as your general in addition to the general that you choose. He is a wizard that can cast 2 spells a turn and unbind 2 enemy spells a turn. Just like he was before. Bloated with Corruption, if an unmodified ward roll is a 6, you can pick 1 enemy unit within 3 inches, and that unit suffers a disease point. So that's pretty good. It's not as good as bouncing back mortal wounds on a 6. But the upside is that this also affects shooting now. So if Radagast gets shot and he's in combat, he can reflect some of the shots that he saves onto the unit he's in combat with, which is kind of a tricky little play. The Rainfather, these are in such an odd order. Tells us as a wizard, then 2 abilities later tells us that he can re-roll his Deluge of Nurgle, and then 2 abilities later tells us what Deluge of Nurgle is. So he can re-roll castings of Deluge of Nurgle. Then let's just jump down to Deluge of Nurgle. This is very similar to his old spell. Has a casting value of 7. If it succeeds, you roll 7 dice. For each 5-up, you pick a visible enemy to the caster, and it suffers D3 mortal wounds. So he's just sprinkling mortal wounds all over the table. This used to be on his damage chart and start at a 4-up and go to a 6-up as he got damaged, and now it's just a 5-up all the time. So I think a reasonable compromise. He's a guy that you're probably going to want to get up in combat. And then finally, we have our Mountains of Loathsome Flesh. This is now a monstrous rampage that is unique to him and the Great Unclean One. Actually, I think the Maggotkin has this too. So it's a monstrous rampage that you can choose, and on a 2-up, the enemy unit suffers mortal wounds equal to the chart, and it starts at 4 mortal wounds. So that's good. You can do this and have another unit stomp as well, so you're doing lots of mortal wounds. And this guy clocks in at 495 points for all of that. I think he might be a little bit overcosted. His defensive profile got better. His spell casting got better. His spell got a little bit worse. His impact hits, with Mountains of Loathsome Flesh got better. His reflecting mortal wounds got different. I don't know if it's necessarily better. So it's a big jump. I believe he was at 345 before, so like a 150 point jump. I think he may be a bit overcosted right now, but he's definitely an interesting pick. Up next, we've got the Great Unclean One. So our options for this guy definitely look different than they used to. He now has 18 wounds compared to the 16 that he used to have, and used to also have the same as Radagast, and now Radagast has 20, and your regular Great Unclean One has 18. Save 4-up save. He used to have a 5-inch move. He's down to 4. and 10 bravery to make those heroic recovery rolls nice and easy. Noxious Bile is his missile attack. This is similar to what it used to be, except now, the same D6 attacks, 3 up, 2 up. Now it is Rend 3 instead of Rend 2, and 2 damage instead of 1. So that is definitely an improvement. That is mostly just going to be throwing up on the models he's in combat with, though. So that's, not really like a normal missile attack. It's very short range. And then we have all of his weapon options. So he does have those 4 different weapon options, 2 for each hand. I think right now the melee loadout for him, the Bile Sword and Plague Flail, is probably going to be your best combination. So the Bile Sword gets 4 attacks, 4s and 3s, rend 2, 4 damage. So that is pretty strong. Not going to lie there. And can potentially get even better with all-out attack, and if you give him Flaming Weapon for a spell, although Flaming Weapon is probably better on the Plague Flail. The Doomsday Bell, 5 attacks, 3 up, rend 1, 2 damage, but as we'll see, you're probably not going to want to take the Doomsday Bell anymore. The Bile Blade, 4 attacks, 3 up, rend 1, 3 damage. So that is definitely a lot stronger than it used to be, although the Flail I think is still a better option because what the Bile Blade does in his abilities is quite different now. So the Plague Flail is 5 attacks, 3s and 3s, rend 1, 3 damage. And then our Host of Nurglings, that's on the damage table, and it starts at 15 attacks. 5s and 5s, no rend 1 damage. These extra Nurgling attacks are just silly now. They're really great for fishing out disease tokens. They're not going to do a lot of damage on their own, but they're really there to fish for disease, I think. So, in this guy's abilities, he is a wizard that can cast and unbind 2 spells a turn. He is bloated with corruption, so that's the same as Rodriguez when he saves a wound with a ward roll of 6. You pick an enemy unit within 3 inches and deal 1 disease point to him. Mountains of Loathsome Flesh, this is the same monstrous action that we had on Rodriguez, doing 4 mortal wounds on a 2-up. Putrid Offering, so in the hero phase, if he is armed with a Bile Blade, you can make an offering to Nurgle, you deal 1 mortal wound to yourself, and he can attempt to cast 1 extra spell in that hero phase. So this used to give us +1 to cast, and now it's giving us an extra spell. The casting in this book is a little on the weak side, so I'm not really sure how useful that extra spell is going to be. So I don't know how often I would really want to take the Bile Blade. And then Reverberating Summons. This is the new ability that we get with the Doomsday Bell. If the unit is armed with the Doomsday Bell at the start of your hero phase, this unit is on the battlefield. You roll a d6. On a 1, nothing happens. On a 2 through 5, you gain 1 contagion point, and on a 6, you gain d3 contagion points. So getting a little bit extra of summoning points, not super exciting. The summoning in this book is just not that strong. So I think your best loadout is really just going to be the Bile Sword and Plague Flail to just make this guy a beater and go take down the enemy baddies. Plague Wind is his signature spell, goes off on a 7, has a range of 14 inches. You pick a point on the battlefield 14 inches away, and visible to the caster, draw a straight line between the point and the caster. You roll a die for every enemy unit that it passes across, and on a 4-up, that unit suffers 1 disease point. Old spell was each one gets D3 mortal wounds, so that's a significant downgrade. Again, this one's 495 points as well. I think this is, again, probably pretty overcosted, although he does have a really strong offensive profile. So I think we're probably going to be seeing him out and about, but I'm not really too excited about the Great Unclean one right now. If he gets a significant points drop, I think he could be interesting. Up next, we've got Horticulus Slimux. He went up to 10 wounds, so he can no longer be a sub-commander in battalions, which is kind of annoying. His save got worse. It used to be a 3-up. It went to a 4-up now. His melee profile is the same as it used to be, really nothing that impressive. When he retreats, as before on a 2-up, he does D3 mortal wounds to the enemy. His Beast Handler ability lets you reroll charges for friendly beasts of Nurgle within 14 inches of him, and add 1 to hit rolls for beasts of Nurgle that are wholly within 14 inches of him. And finally, we have Cultivating the Garden that lets you set up a Feculent Gnarl Maw once per battle at the beginning of your hero phase for free. Feculent Gnarl Maws are not what they used to be, so this isn't as great as it once was. I think Horticulus is definitely hurting right now. He's 225 points. Definitely, first 3 scrolls into this book and nothing too exciting yet. Epidemus. This guy I think is actually interesting. So 4-inch move, 4-up save, bravery 10, 7 wounds. His attack profile is nothing exciting. He's got 10 Nurgling attacks to throw around, some disease. The big thing is his Tallyman of Nurgle ability. This is really what he does. He really has nothing else going on. So at the start of your hero phase, you roll a die for each of the following units and terrain features that are visible to the unit. So you get 3 dice for each Great Unclean one, 2 dice for each Plague Bearer host unit with 10 or more models, and each Feculent Gnarlmaw in your army, and then 1 die for each other friendly Maggotkin of Nurgle unit. So you roll all those dice, and for each 5-up, you get to tally the disease and add to the tally that Epidemus has. You can then use, each of the recorded diseases to reroll a ward roll, casting, dispelling, or unbinding rolls made by friendly Maggotkin units. I think the key trick here is being able to reroll casting. That is a really strong ability, but he's not going to do a lot other than that. So you're doing all of this bookkeeping and all of this dice rolling to, reroll spells occasionally and reroll unbinds occasionally. So I think it's not super exciting. He's 145 points, so maybe occasionally you'll just have those extra points and you'll shove him in there to see what happens. But I'm not too excited. All right, the Poxbringer Herald of Nurgle. He is your pretty stock standard chump wizard. Uninteresting melee profile. We're going to see this sort of ability come up a couple of times in this book. The captain of the Taliban, when he's selected to fight in the combat phase, he can pick a friendly Plague Bearer unit within 12 inches, and that unit can pile in an attack immediately after the Poxbringer attacks. So I don't know why your Poxbringer is in combat, and I don't know how much you're really going to do by attacking with Plague Bearers. So I think that one kind of falls flat. And then his spell is Eruptive Infestation. Has a casting value of 6. When it's successfully cast, pick an enemy unit within 3 inches of a Plague Bearer host unit and that is visible to the caster, and the enemy unit suffers D3 mortal wounds. I think this guy is going to be mostly useful for just being a wizard that you can throw the spell lore spells on. Otherwise, he's really not that good, especially at 145 points. Spoilpox Scrivener. This guy is basically the same as he previously was. So in each combat phase, you get to pick a Plague Bearer host unit wholly within 14 inches of him, and then pick one of the tallies to carry out. It can add one to the attacks characteristic of melee weapons that they're carrying. It can improve the Ren characteristic of their melee weapons by 1, or it can add 1 to their save rolls. He used to just affect Plague Bearer keyword guys, which also impacted your Plague Drones, but they no longer have the same keyword. Now this is specifically Plague Bearer host units, so that's your unit of 10 dudes. So I think he's definitely gone down in power, even though his scroll hasn't changed. Also, there's just less stacking of attacks that you can throw on Plague Bearers, so it's really hard to justify using this guy, I think. His most useful ability is probably that free +1 save, but at 120 points compared to 150 points for another 10 Plague Bearers, I don't see why you wouldn't just buy 10 more Plague Bearers for 30 more points. Alright, Sloppity Bile Piper. This guy is similar to what he used to be. So he sings his tunes, and all demon units within 14 inches of him are affected by the tune. A Stabbing We Will Go adds 1 to wound rolls for attacks made by melee weapons within 14 inches of him. That used to be +1 attack, so not nearly as good. Early one evening, my pustule was seeping. This used to do mortal wounds on hits of 6, now it's doing mortal wounds on wounds of 6. It would be kind of a non-bow if it was hits of 6, because you're also doing disease on hits of 6, so you can't stack up 2 abilities triggering on 1 die roll like that, so it got moved to a wound roll, which also makes it pretty significantly worse. And then finally, Love is Like a Ripe, Ripe Fart. That is the same as it used to be. It prevents enemy pile-ins. So he's 130 points. I think he's definitely useful for the fart. I don't know how useful he is for his other 2 abilities anymore. Especially, again, because you can't stack all of those attacks on your Plague Bearers anymore. So you're just not going to get the weight of dice behind those wounds of 6 doing mortal wounds. That's going to be enough to really make it worth it. So I don't think we're going to see this guy too much anymore, which is sad because he's an awesome model. Alright, moving on to the mortals, we have the Maggotkin. So he is up to 20 wounds. He is down to movement 5, although it is not on a movement chart anymore. The missile weapon is pretty considerably changed. It is 7 attacks, 3s and 3s, -1 damage. I'm sorry, -2 1 damage. So he's fairly reliably going to be doing a couple of wounds with his range attack when things are in range. His other attacks have gotten a significant improvement. The Tentacle starts off on 7 attacks, 3s and 2s, rend 2, 3 damage. The Lamprey Maw does 3 attacks, 3s and 2s, rend 2, 3 damage. So he's throwing around 10 attacks at rend 2, 3 damage. That's kind of a lot. He does a lot of damage. And then Auto Scythe, 4 attacks, 3s and 3s, rend 1, d3 damage. So, going through this, list of abilities that we have here. He is a War Master, so he always counts as your general. He's a wizard. He casts and unbinds 2 spells a turn. The Blight Krieg is a really interesting command ability. So you use it at the end of the movement phase, and you do it when you're within 12 inches of an enemy unit. The command has to be issued by this unit and must be received by another friendly Maggotkin of Nurgle unit within 12 inches of an enemy unit. So he can't do this on himself, which is the target that you really, really want to put this on. So in that case, when you successfully have him and another friendly unit within 12 inches of enemy units, it doesn't have to be the same enemy unit, by the way, and this can be across the battlefield. So anyway, the ability that it actually does is allows that unit to make a charge move at the end of the enemy movement phase. That's really interesting. You get your opponent stuck into combat in a place that they don't really want to be, or get them into a combat that they don't want to be in. So I think it's definitely a strong command, and I think if I was running the Glotkin, I would probably use that pretty frequently. However, he is 700 points now, and I just cannot justify running him. He's good, but I don't think he's 700 points good. Let's finish going through the War Scroll. So, horrific opponent, you roll 2d6 against the enemy bravery, and if you beat the bravery, it's cut off there, but I believe it forces the enemy unit to make a retreat move if it's within 3 inches of the Glotkin. Mountains of Loathsome Flesh, so this is the Monstrous Rampage. However, his starts at 5 instead of 4 on the damage table there. So on a 2-up, doing 5 mortal wounds when he does his Mountains of Loathsome Flesh ability. And then his spell is Abundance of Flesh. It casts on a 6. It has a range of 14 inches. You pick one friendly Maggotkin of Nurgle unit in range. And visible to the caster, add 1 to the wounds characteristic of that unit until your next hero phase. Note that there is also a spell that does this same thing in the spell lore. So you can give a unit +2 to their wounds characteristic. So the thing that we got rid of in this army was stacking all kinds of additional attacks. What we got instead is stacking additional wounds in the wounds characteristic, which is really interesting. Like, you can combine things to make a unit of plague bearers, as we will see, get them up to 4 wounds each. That's kind of a lot. That is definitely a lot to deal with. So it's interesting. I feel like he is not worth 700 points, but his War Scroll is really good, really interesting. If he gets a points drop, I think he's going to be really solid. I certainly will run games experimenting with him at 700 points anyway, because he's an awesome model and he has a lot of really cool abilities, and he's definitely a beater in combat. All right, next we have Festus the Leech Lord. I think his War Scroll may be exactly the same as in the previous book. So he can heal himself or nearby friendly units, or he can do mortal wounds to enemy units that are within an inch of him. The important thing here is his spell, casting value 7, range of 14 inches. When it's cast, you pick an enemy unit in range, and you subtract 1 to save rolls for attacks that target that unit for the rest of the battle. And the same unit can't be affected by it more than once. So, Rustfang, out of bounds, needed to be changed. Festus the Leech Lord, unchanged, up 10 points. I don't know what to tell you guys. I really still like Festus. I think that spell is really strong. His healing is also just a great little addition to everything that this army has going on. So I think he's good. He's definitely going to pop up in a lot of lists, I think. I think this is probably the first thing so far that I've been like, yeah, I'm impressed by this. I want to use more of these. All right, up next is Gutrot Spume. He has gone up to 8 wounds, but he used to be on a 3-up save and he got moved to a 4. His melee profile definitely got a bit better. His Towering Arrogance ability, not as strong as it used to be. This is just adding 1 to hit rolls for attacks made by the unit that target a hero. And if it's within an inch of an enemy hero, all the attacks that he makes has to target that hero. He no longer has the ability to disable an enemy weapon, and he has a bit of a change to his Master of the Slime Fleet ability. So now he can be deployed in reserve and brought onto the board within 6 inches of the board edge and bring in up to 3 mortal Maggotkin of Nurgle units with him. That is not specifying not heroes. This used to just be 1 unit of Blight Kings. Now it is up to 3 units of any Maggotkin of Nurgle mortals. And you have to set up all the models within 12 inches of Gutrot Spume, 9 inches away from enemy models, and wholly within 6 inches of the board edge. So this guy is really interesting. We're going to have to see what things actually look like. There's nothing that is giving you buffs to charge anymore. So you're going to have to nail a 9-inch charge. That's definitely a challenge, although stuffing a bunch of stuff in your opponent's backfield is really powerful, especially with a smaller board and a bunch of scenarios that have objectives on the border of enemy territory. So he's really interesting. He's gone up in points a bit, but his abilities have also gotten stronger, more interesting. So I like him. I think he'll probably see some play. I'll definitely be trying him out. Up next, we've got Bloab Rotspawn. He is up to 13 wounds, still has a 4-up save. His movement is still on a movement chart and starts at 8 inches. I believe it used to start at 12. His shooting attack is the same as it used to be. D3 attacks, 3s and 2s, Ren 2, D3 damage. His scythe, I think this is going to be similar to what it used to be. 3 attacks, 3s and 3s, rend 1, 2 damage. But the monstrous claws, the mount for all of the Maggoth lords, it's the same for all 3 of them. It is 5 attacks, 3 up, 2 up, rend 2, 3 damage. That mount is pounding a lot of damage into your opponent. And the scythe isn't terrible either. So if that wasn't enough, he is also a wizard that can cast an Unbind 1 spell. He has the Demon Flies ability at the start of the combat phase and the enemy shooting phase. You roll a die for each enemy unit within 7 inches of him. And on a 4-up, the enemy unit suffers a mortal wound and you subtract 1 from hit rolls for attacks made by that enemy unit in that phase. So he is handing out -1 to hit on a 4-up. That is definitely pretty solid. The Wind Speaker Bells, you add 1 to casting rolls for this unit. That is very unusual. His casting definitely got better. I think everybody was hoping he was going to cast 2 spells, but getting +1 to cast is awesome. And he also subtracts 1 from enemy casting rolls within 14 inches of him. That is also really powerful. So, and then we have his spell, the Miasma of Pestilence. So it targets a unit within 14 inches. It's got a casting value of 6. His +1 to cast makes that happen on a 5. If it's successfully cast, you pick an enemy unit within 14 inches, and until your next hero phase, each time that unit has a wound inflicted on it, you roll a die. And on a 2+, it takes an additional D3 mortal wounds. Every phase. So let's just go through this real quick. You cast this out there first. It is very easy to get this spell off. So you put it on an enemy unit. Then you do some other spell to it that does mortal wounds. Bam, on a 2-up, D3 more mortal wounds. Your shooting phase. There's a bunch of miscellaneous shooting attacks in the Nurgle arsenal, including one on this unit. Bam, another D3 mortal wounds in the shooting phase. Then you go to the charge phase. Well, he can charge into that unit and then do a stomp attack with his monstrous rampages. It's going to do another D3 mortal wounds if the stomp is successful. And then he gets into combat. And in the combat phase, he's going to do some damage and then do another D3 mortal wounds from this spell. And then in the battle shock phase, you roll for the disease tokens. And if he gets mortal wounds from disease, he gets another D3 mortal wounds. So this guy can just deal tons and tons of damage with this spell, and it lasts until your next hero phase, and it's very easy to cast. So I think it is really good. I think this is one of the best war scrolls in the book. He is really good, and it only gets better from here, I promise. Morbidex Twiceborn. This is our second Maggoth Lord. He's got 12 wounds and a 3-up save. He's got a shooting attack that is 7 inches, 3 attacks, 3s and 2s, rend 1, 1 damage. He has the same mount attacks, so 5 attacks, 3s and 2s, rend 2, 3 damage. And then his scythe is 5 attacks, 3s and 3s, rend 1, 2 damage. So he is definitely throwing around even more damage than Blowab was. And then his abilities at the end of the battle shock phase, he heals half of the wounds that he suffered that turn, rounding up. So he's really hard to kill. So he's 12 wounds, he's got a 5-up ward, he heals half the wounds that he has suffered in that turn in every battle shock phase, and then he heals a wound in all of your hero phases, and he can use heroic recovery in every hero phase to heal another D3. He's got bravery 9, so that is really easy to make that heroic recovery roll. This guy is really hard to kill. And then he has the Lord of the Nurglings ability. At the start of your hero phase, you can return 1 slain model to a friendly Nurgling sworn within 7 inches of this unit. Not super useful, although Nurglings are decent now, so I think he's interesting. He's 320 points. I forgot to mention that Blowab is 300, so they've gotten a significant price hike, but they are way better than they used to be. And then finally, this guy is my favorite war scroll in the book. Orgoth's Demon Spew. He is 300 points. He has 14 wounds with a 3-up save, and of course his 5-up Disgusting Resilience. So again, he is also super tough to kill. He has a 7-inch ranged attack, 1 attack, 3s and 2s, rend 1 d6 damage. So he's throwing around a little cannonball. His rod axes do 7 attacks, 3s and 3s, rend 1, 2 damage. So he is even more aggressive than his 2 friends. And then our monstrous claws, once again, 5 attacks, 3s and 2s, rend 2, 3 damage. He is an absolute beast stick. I love this guy so much. I cannot wait to just throw him into enemy units and kill things. This guy is like 200 points less than a Great Unclean one and has about the same damage output. It is bananas. I love it. And then we just take a quick look at his abilities. He is also a War Master, so he always counts as your general. He has Acid Ichor if an unmodified ward roll for this unit is a 6. You pick one enemy unit within 3 inches, and that unit suffers a mortal wound. So he's also bouncing back mortal wounds onto enemy units. And then the Lord of Nurgle, once per turn, if this unit can use a command ability on a friendly Maggotkin of Nurgle unit without spending a command point. So he just gets a free command ability every turn. Really good. Really, really good. Alright, Fecula Flyblown and the Wormspat. So they are 255 points, 4-inch move, 4-up save, 7 wounds, and then the Wormspat is 2 Blight Kings, basically. Both of them have 5 wounds and a 4-up save. So Fecula Flyblown, her melee attack is not really interesting. She has, is that Retchling? The name of that ability. Once per battle, she can cast 1 extra spell in your hero phase. Tainted Endless Spells. So when she casts an endless spell, that endless spell, for purposes of the disease battle trait, is treated as a Maggotkin of Nurgle unit. So, in the movement phase and in the combat phase, if it's within 3 inches of an enemy unit, it gets a disease point. Really good. Just more ways to spread disease across the battlefield, and that's even going to be better with endless spells that do damage. And then Stream of Corruption is her spell. Has a casting value of 6 and range of 7. If it's successfully cast, you pick 1 enemy unit within range and visible. You roll 1 die for each model in that unit that is within range, and for each 5-up, that unit suffers 1 mortal wound. So, also before attempting to cast the spell, you can extend the range to 14 inches and inflict mortal wounds on only a 6 instead of a 5 or 6. Then the Wormspat, they can just bodyguard for Fecula on a 4-up. Fecula will allocate her wounds to the Wormspat instead of to herself if they're within 3 inches of her. And then they have the Relentless Attacker's ability at the end of the combat phase. Pick an enemy unit with a wounds characteristic of 3 or less within 3 inches of the unit. Roll a die for each model in that unit within 3 inches. For each roll that exceeds the enemy's wound characteristic, the enemy suffers 1 mortal wound. So that's real good. I like that a lot, and their attack profile, 5 attacks each, 3s and 3s, rend 1, 1 damage, and that is our new Blight King profile as well. All right, so I think it's definitely interesting. She's going to be a very durable wizard. Her spell is, I guess, okay. The big thing is going to be casting out endless spells from her, I think. That is where the money is going to be. All right, our brand new Harbinger of Decay at 140 points. He's got a 3-up save instead of a 4-up now, which is good. His move is 6 instead of 7, so it's a little bit bad. Still 7 wounds, bravery 8. His attack profile is very similar to what it used to be. Nothing too exciting there. He has the Augur of Entropy. If a friendly unit with this ability is within 7 inches of your general, at the start of the first battle round, you receive D3 extra command points. So in the first battle round, you get some extra command points. And then Shudder Blight. This is essentially just getting a second roar. So at the start of the combat phase, you pick 1 enemy unit within 3 inches of this unit and roll a die. On a 3-up, the enemy unit cannot issue or receive commands in that phase. So you really just want to stick him into the enemy, and you get an extra roar ability that isn't named Roar. So you can do it twice. He's interesting. I think he's probably just not worth it. I mean, this book is just so heavy on points. Everything is so expensive that I just don't see you having room for this guy. Yeah, you could kind of build around a theme of denying enemy commands. You have a few different sources of that in the book, but I'm not sure that's necessarily like the best thing to do. All right. Then we have the Lord of Afflictions, and man, did this guy get interesting. So he's up to 8 wounds from the 7 that he used to have. Actually, no, he used to have 8 wounds. I apologize. He's now on a 3-up save. His attack profile, 4 attacks, 3s and 3s, rend 1d3 damage. And then his mount is 6 attacks, 3s and 3s, no rend, 1 damage. So his attacks got really streamlined compared to what they used to be. He used to have 4 melee profiles, now he just has 1. The Incubatch, this is unchanged from what it used to be. You roll a die for each unit within 3 inches. On a 2-up, the unit suffers a mortal wound, unless it's a Nurgle unit, in which case it suffers 1 mortal wound on a 6-up instead. Rack and Ruin. After this unit finishes a charge move, you roll a die for each enemy unit within an inch of the unit after it completes the charge. You add 2 to the roll if this unit has a Dolores Toxin, which it always will. You've got no reason not to on a Lord of Afflictions. On 4-up, so really on a 2-up, the enemy suffers D3 mortal wounds. So that's really good. When he completes a charge, he's doing mortal wounds most of the time. And then the Swarm descends. So he can be deployed in reserve and set up on the battlefield more than 9 inches away from enemy units. And he can bring 2 units along with him, either Puscoiled Light Lords or Plague Drones. And they can deep strike along with him. They have to be set up within 12 inches of him and outside of 9 inches of enemy units. So that is really interesting. That adds more mobility to all of your most mobile units. Really interesting. There's no bonuses to charge, so it's not for deep strike and charge. This is for deep strike and zone, or deep strike and get in your opponent's face and be in their way. I'm not going to say chaff, because that is not what that is. It's really deep strike and drop an anvil in their face. So I think this guy is really interesting. He's one of your better options for a general as well. And that artifact that gives him a 4-up ward save makes him comparable in defense to Gotrek, which is really interesting. And then he has Bravery 9, so heroic recovery rolls are really good. He heals 1 in each of your hero phases anyway from Disgusting Resilience. I mean, this guy is really interesting. 210 points. I like him a lot. He's definitely going to show up in a lot of lists. And I think the Swarm Descends is going to be a really good ability that is going to deal with some of the issues that Nurgle has with speed. All right, up next is the Lord of Blights. So this guy is now on a 3-up save and 7 wounds. His Thrice Ripened Death's Head is now only 7 inches compared to the 14 that it used to be. His melee profile is not that exciting. So at the start of the shooting phase, you can pick a friendly Putrid Blight King model within 7 inches of this unit, and that model can shoot in the shooting phase using the Thrice Ripened Death's Head missile weapon profile. And then the attacks characteristic is equal to the number of models in the target unit to a maximum of 7. So it only has a range of 7, but you just count up all the models in that unit and you get that many attacks to a maximum of 7. The maximum of 7 is where this one is tough, I think, and becomes less useful. Then he has the Lord of the Blight Kings. This is the same sort of ability that the Poxbringer has, where he gets into combat and can activate a unit of Blight Kings along with him that are within 12 inches of him immediately after in the combat phase. So I go, you go. Not that useful. I don't want to be shoving this guy up into combat. I don't really see him being there. He's not really a useful combat unit. And he's 150 points. Not really seeing taking this guy too much. Alright, the Lord of Plagues. Alright, so we get a little attack upgrade on his melee profile, doing 4 attacks compared to the 3 that he used to do. 3 up, rend 1d3 damage. You receive 1 contagion point for each enemy unit that is destroyed by an attack made by this unit. It is really hard for him to kill anything, so that's really just sort of like this side thing. You're not going to get... You can't really make a game plan around getting contagion from this guy. Sevenfold Slaughter. At the start of the combat phase, you pick a friendly Putrid Blight King unit within 12 inches of him, and you get to add 1 to the attack characteristic of that unit for their melee weapons until the end of that phase. So he can just hand out +1 attack to a unit of Blight Kings. I mean, not terrible. And then he has the same ability that the Lord of Blights had as well, the whole charge in and activate twice in a row thing. But again, I don't really want to get him in combat. He's going to be a support in back doing his Sevenfold Slaughter. So he's 145 points. You know, I think Sevenfold Slaughter is interesting. I see that mostly being interesting on like a unit of 10 Blight Kings, but as we're going to see, I don't think a unit of 10 Blight Kings is going to happen very often. So I think this guy has some limited usefulness, which is terrible because he's such an awesome model. Alright, and then we've got the Rotbringer Sorcerer. Yeah, this guy is basically the same as Fecula Flyblown with, you know, the difference of not having the once per game extra cast. You know, he still taints endless spells. His spell is the same as Fecula. You know, he's got the same like nonsense melee profile and kind of weak other like save and wounds. Nothing too exciting there. You know, the big thing is he's a mortal wizard and he can taint endless spells. I think that is definitely having the potential to be really good. You know, in combining with other things too, like, you know, we have a couple of abilities that deny enemy commands, and then if you combine that with, you know, Geminids cast off of a Rotbringer or off of Fecula, you know, now they are also spreading disease in addition to denying enemy commands. So you can really shut down a lot of what your opponent is doing. All right. Moving on now to our units. We'll start with our Plague Bearer Host. Their melee profile is the same as it ever was. 1 attack each, 4s and 3s, no rend 1 damage. So they have gone to 2 wounds, and they have a 6-up save instead of a 5-up save now. Their Standard Bearer, on a Battle Shock roll of 1, he returns a slain model to the unit and no models flee. His Musician makes enemies reroll Battle Shock tests of 1, and his Cloud of Flies, you subtract 1 from hit rolls of enemy missile attacks that target the unit when it has 5 or more models. So there's some weird changes to this, right? Like, their previous scroll had 1 wound each, but it was a 5-up save that went to a 4-up save when they were within 7 inches of a friendly Nurgle demon hero. In the Cloud of Flies used to be -1 to hit in shooting and melee. So, and that Standard Bearer used to bring back D6 models. But now we've got 2 wounds instead of 1. So I haven't done out like all of the math, but they're definitely more durable than they used to be, but not by a ton. Without that -1 to hit um, in melee, I think they definitely are going to struggle. They're on 32 mil bases, and the new um, unit coherency rules really hurt them badly. So it's going to be tough. These guys are going to sit on objectives. They're going to sort of screen for your other units, get up in the middle of the battlefield, and just get in the way. They're definitely not here for offense. As you've seen, there's very little you can do to buff their offense anymore. You know, +1 to their attacks profile from a Spoilpox Scrivener and mortal wounds on 6s to wound from a Sloppity Bilepiper. That's about the best you can do. So, nothing really too interesting there. I think where the money really is going to be is adding to their wounds characteristic with spells, and just using these guys to kind of stand around and be in the way, and be bodies on objectives. They've also gone up to 150 points, which it feels expensive, but they are one of your few battle line units. So, you know, and it's one of your cheapest battle line options. So there's definitely some play there. They have a role in the army. I definitely see myself playing them. I'll always have them in my case with me when I play this army because you can summon them. And, you know, I'm not sure I'm ever going to play with these guys and feel good about it. I think they're mostly going to be there as filler, or because I have to take them for battle line or something like that. Up next, we've got Plague Drones. So their profile in the wheel, same as it used to be. 8-inch move, 5-up save, 10 bravery, 5 wounds each. Their Death's Head ability has changed to have an attacks characteristic equal to the number of models in the enemy unit to a maximum of 7. Their attack profile got condensed down, and the Plague Sword and the Claws, Mouthparts, and Stinger have the same hit and wound profile. So it's just doing 8 attacks, 3s and 3s, no rend, 1 damage for each model. 3 of them in a unit for 200 points. Their Standard Bearer can bring 1 model back to the unit on a Battle Shock roll of 1. Musician makes enemies reroll Battle Shock tests of 1. The champion gets an extra attack. I mean, not super exciting. Their melee output is just not what it used to be. They used to just be able to stack buffs and buffs and buffs and get a bazillion attacks and really mulch your opponent. They can't do that anymore. There's nothing that's going to give them more attacks. So other than, no, Sloppity Bilepiper doesn't even do that. So yeah, he is just going to sit here on 8 attacks each. So 24 attacks on 3s and 3s. You'll probably get through like 6 or 7 damage for a unit of 3. Not super exciting. These guys are very vanilla. They're good because they're mobile, and you can pick them up and put them down with the Lord of Afflictions. I don't know. I think Pusk-Oils are better. That's kind of my bottom line on it. I think Pusk-Oils are just better. And they're very similar in points cost. So definitely I think Pusk-Oils. Up next, we got the Beast of Nurgle. This, I think, is exactly the same as the scroll previously was. 5-inch move, 5-up save, 10 bravery, 8 wounds, 4 attacks, 4s and 3s, rend 1, 2 damage, and then d6 attacks, 4s and 3s, no rend, 1 damage. It can retreat and charge in the same turn. when it retreats, you roll a die. On a 4-up, it doesn't mortal. Oh, I'm sorry, it does 1 disease. So this is a little bit changed. So it does 1 disease to the enemy unit within 3 inches. And then when he charges, you roll a die. On a 2-up, the enemy unit within 1 inch suffers D3 mortal wounds. And if a unit has if this unit has more than 1 model, you roll to determine if mortal wounds are caused after each model finishes their charge move, but do not allocate mortal wounds until all of the models in the unit have finished their charge moves. So you can take these in units of 2, and if they're battle line in the appropriate host, and I'm forgetting which one that is now, but if you're in the host that makes them battle line, they can then be taken in groups of 3, which kind of starts getting a little bit scary because they're doing a lot of mortal wounds when they charge, and then have an okay attack profile, and they're only 110 wounds, or I'm sorry, 110 points each. So they're interesting. They're definitely not terrible. Now these guys got interesting. They're 4-inch move, 6-up save, 4 wounds each. So they are a block of 12 wounds, with a 6-up save and a 5-up ward. So, and they're 105 points. They do 5 attacks each, 5s and 5s, no rend 1 damage. They heal back up to full at the end of each turn, and they can be set up in reserve and set up within 3 inches of a terrain feature and more than 9 inches from enemy models. These guys I think are going to be really interesting for like a chaff unit and a screen unit. Also for just babysitting objectives or stealing objectives from your opponent. They have basically the same defensive profile of Plague Bearers, right? They got a 6-up save and a 5-up ward. They've got 12 wounds compared to the Plague Bearers 20. Plague Bearers are 150 points compared to the 105 of the Nurglings. So, I mean, I think the Plague Bearers per point, I think, are slightly more efficient in terms of defense, but you can set these guys up in reserve and pop them onto the battlefield. And they do their little healing jig, and yeah, I mean, they're interesting. They're like the Plague Bearers. They're doing nothing on offense, but these guys are throwing a higher quantity of attacks, so they'll be spreading around more disease. So I think these guys are really interesting now. Like, they used to be a bad unit, but now I can definitely see myself throwing them in a list to act in a way very similarly to like what Slaves to Darkness does with Untamed Beasts, where they're just kind of getting out there into the middle of the field on the first turn to absorb charges and be in the way and jump on objectives, all of those sorts of things. I would really love it if these guys were 5 wounds each, so then they would count as 2 models on objectives each, but we can't have everything we want. All right, moving on to our mortal units. We have our Putrid Blight Kings. 4-inch move, 4-up save, 8 bravery, and 4 wounds each. The champion has an extra wound. The standard bearer adds 1 to the bravery characteristic, and the musician, enemy units reroll battle shock tests of 1 when they're within 6 inches of them. And then they have the Relentless Attacker's ability at the end of the combat phase. Pick an enemy unit wholly with a wounds characteristic of 3 or less within 3 inches of this unit. Roll a die for each model that is within 3 inches of this unit, and for each roll that exceeds the wound characteristic of the enemy model, they suffer 1 mortal wound. So that is actually potentially doing a significant number of mortal wounds. In addition, Their melee profile, 5 attacks each, 3s and 3s, rend 1, 1 damage. And they are 250 points. So a unit of 5 of these guys is throwing 25 attacks, so that is going to average out to 4 disease tokens, and then Relentless Attackers is going to do more mortal wounds. They also now have Disgusting Resilience, so they're healing in your hero phase, and they are also on a 5-up ward save all the time. So these guys are really pricey now at 250, but honestly, with all of those things stacked together, I think they're probably actually worth their points. Maybe they could be a little bit cheaper. We're going to have to see how much damage is actually done by disease and relentless attackers, but I think it definitely has some real potential here. They don't have their exploding 6s anymore, but they got their attack profile improved, and the improvement to the attack profile actually overcompensates for what we're getting from the exploding 6s, and now is a whole lot more consistent. So we don't have to worry about the swinginess that you get with those exploding 6s. They're just 25 attacks all the time, and they have rend all the time now, which is also fantastic. Don't have to pay anything extra for that. So, I mean, I really like Blight Kings. I think these are going to be like the backbone of your army most of the time now. At 250 points, it's going to be tough to fit too many of them into your list. But, you know, I've played Nurgle for a long time, and I have played in the times where you could only really fit like 25 Blight Kings into a list, which is, I think, where we're at right now. Like 20 or 25 is probably what you're going to run most of the time. And I don't really see a problem with that, because it is going to leave you off with enough room for other support units. And your other options for support, I think, are much better than they used to be now. Alright, and then finally, our last unit, the Puscoil Blight Lords. These guys got a little improvement to their wounds characteristic. They used to be 7 each, and now they are 8. They are 220 points each. They have the same melee profile as Blight Kings, 5 attacks each, 3s and 3s, rend 1, 1 damage. And then their Claws, Mouth Parts, and Stinger, 6 attacks each, 3s and 3s, no rend, 1 damage. So standard Rot Flies. They have the same Rack and Ruin ability that your Lord of Afflictions has. So if they have a Dolorous Toxin still in the unit, when they charge on a 2-up, they will do D3 mortal wounds. Otherwise, it's on a 4-up. Just make sure that you pull the Toxin last. And then we have the same Relentless Attackers ability as the Blight Kings, so doing more mortal wounds in combat at the end of combat as well. So I think these guys are really good. I think they're better than they used to be. Their points haven't gone up that much. I think they're just really strong in general. I like them a lot. I've always liked Puscoils, and I like them more now than I used to. I think they're real good. Definitely going to be running these in like every list for a while. So yeah, really, really strong all around on the Puscoil Blight Lords. All right, so that is all of the war scrolls and abilities. I didn't go through battle tactics and grand strategies and battalions. The short version of that is they're all bad. So I didn't even want to bother talking about them. I know a lot of TOs are talking about not allowing the stuff from books in tournaments as well. So, and they're just a pain to use them at all. Like, you have your normal cheat sheet of abilities, and then you go over to the side and you've got your army specific ones as well. I think it just doesn't play well, and you're just going to forget to use these all the time. And the fact that none of them are really any good, it just kind of compounds that you're never going to bother pulling this out unless you are in like an hour of desperation and need a battle tactic really bad. So just get it wrapped up here. Orgoth's Demon Spew and Bloab Rotspawn. I think they are the MVPs of this book. They are absolutely fantastic war scrolls. They are pretty fairly pointed, I think. They do a ton of damage. They have great abilities. Just top notch. More of this, please. The Great Unclean ones and the Glotkin right now, I think they are just too expensive in this book currently. And I think there's nothing wrong with their war scrolls. I think it's just a points issue. If they were to come in like 10 or 20%, I think they'd be a lot more viable. Probably more on the 20% side. I think these guys are really overcosted. Especially the Glotkin. 700 points is just really, really high. But I love the War Scroll. That's where I'm kind of torn on this. It's really, for me, just a points issue. And that's something that can be fixed every 6 months that we really don't have to worry about. So if we get out there and Games Workshop realizes that these things are really expensive and nobody's playing them, then hopefully we'll get a points drop on them and they'll be a bit more playable. In general, our mortals are looking better than our demons right now. I'm really kind of struggling to see uses for most of the demons. And then on the mortal side, you know, the Maggoth Lords are all three of them really good. Your Sorcerer is really good. Fecula Flyblown is good. Blight Kings and Puscoil Blight Lords are both just going to be the staples of your army. I think probably my number one demon unit is going to be Nurglings, which is a far departure from what they used to be. They're just sticky little dudes now that are going to get in your opponent's way, and they've got a job to do, and they're going to do it pretty well. I like it. So that means I actually have to get some Nurglings painted up, I think. So overall impression, this is not like an S tier army. Like, by no means are we going to see this book hit the tournament scene and suddenly we're going to see a ton of Maggotkin of Nurgle 5.0s. Not going to happen. I think this book is really solid overall. I think it is going to be like a top of the fat middle army, so to speak. Like, they're going to be on the high side of average, which I think is a good place for a book to be, period. I think this is going to be a good book to take to a tournament and have a good time. You're not going to feel really outclassed by anything. The things that are really strong in tournaments right now, like particularly all of the things that do mortal wound shooting, I mean, all of your stuff has a ward save, so you're better equipped to deal with that than most other armies are. You also have a lot of wounds you can throw on the board. Just a lot of different things that kind of stack up for you that I think give you a little bit of an edge against some of the better armies right now that other armies really don't get. And then I think against the quote-unquote fair armies, I think you have an edge against them. You've got all of the latest technology packed into the book for you, and you are more resilient than any other army. You're just extremely durable. You're throwing extra mortal wounds around everywhere. You've got a lot of pretty decent abilities, some solid units. I think the only real issue in this book is things seem at face value to be a bit overpriced, but it's going to depend. When we actually put the army on the table and see how it plays, maybe we won't feel that way. But for right now, like, my initial impression is it feels a little bit overpriced, but we're going to have to see where we go with that. I'm not sure what points adjustments necessarily need to be made right now, other than like the Great Unclean ones and the Glotkin definitely need to come down. Other than that, I'm not really sure. It's going to definitely take some play testing to see what's good, what's bad, all of that sort of thing. And yeah. Anyway, That is it for now. I made it under 2 hours, which is pretty awesome. I just motored through this thing. Tried to give as much insight as I could, and hopefully you guys enjoyed it. I know there's a lot of places where you can go get reviews of battle tomes, so I'm glad you stopped by here and listened to my rambling for this past 2 hours or so. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and all of those things. And I have a feeling that if you are still here listening to my voice, you've probably already hit the subscribe button. But in case you haven't, go do that now. Thank you all for watching. I'll talk to you all later.